Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Care Carving. Today, I'm actually not going to be making anything. My friend Angelo here is going to be doing all the work while I run the camera. Angelo is a very skilled woodworker, and he's been making a lot of picnic tables lately. So he reached out to me and asked if I'd like to make a video with him, and of course I was thrilled to do it. So he's going to show you how to make a picnic table. Real quick, if you liked the video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe so you can see more videos just like this one, and let's get to work.
Today we'll be making a DIY pressure-treated picnic table with removable benches. We're going to start with the table legs. If you have a chop saw, you can set it to 45-degree angle. If you don't have a chop saw, just grab your nifty speed square and mark a 45-degree angle on your PT 2x4s. Once you have your angle set, then we need to make 4 of these table legs. Since I make so many of them, I like to speed up production, and I have a little jig set up on my chop saw bench so I can do them all the same way. But don't worry, if you're just making one, you can just measure it out. Once you have your first angle cut, then mark out 37¼ inches from the long point, and that's the short point of your next angle. So this gives you 2 perpendicular angles. Then, the easy way to repeat all these cuts, so you just take your first one, trace it on, mark it. With these, I already cut the first angle to speed things up, but you could just mark it straight onto your next 2x4 like this, and mark your next one. Do one at a time because your blade kerf will take away some of the material. There, we have our table legs. Now, we have to make the brace to attach it to the surface of the picnic table. You don't have to change the angle on this at all. This ends up being the same angle that our legs are, and it all fits together like this. So keep your chop saw set to the same angle, or if you're using a square, you just mark 45-degree angle on your 2x4, set it to 45, and cut the angle like that. I'm going to use the chop saw to speed it up a little bit. So I just cut this. It's 27 inches long from the 2 long points with a 45-degree angle. Now we have to make the notch. Take your table leg, line it up, place it on here so that the angle matches up. Once you make sure that both sides are flush, mark this angle here. And so that's the same 45-degree angle, but with these 2 ends flush. Then you take your 2x4 so the edge is flush up against the outside of your 2x4. And then make a mark like that. So this should be around 1.5 inches wide depending on the 2x4 you have. Sometimes they're irregular. You take your speed square and connect the lines. So you see here, there's this angle, 45-degree angle matching with the outside, and then a notch, 1.5 inches. And here. I don't have an actual measurement for here because it could be different depending on where you get your lumber. Sometimes they're a little different size. So it's always better just to trace it directly on to make sure you have the exact match for your lumber. Take your skill saw, set the blade thickness for the same depth as your line. I usually do this on the chop saw just to speed things up, but you can do it just fine with a skill saw. Then you have a nice line there. Then, in this direction, you keep on cutting this way and meet your line. There should be a little bit that's left here. You can do a couple different things for this. Either you can flip it over, make another line on here, and finish cutting it like this. Or if you like, you could just take a handsaw and finish the cut. Another option, you could do it on your table saw. You could set your fence to 1.5 inches or whatever this is, and you just zip this through the table saw. Let's demonstrate that option. So I have my mark started. All I do is go up to my table saw, set it to where I want to cut on the interior of the saw blade. Don't forget safety glasses. So you can see it's a nice clean cut for this notch. It's alright if it goes a little bit further. It will be underneath the table, nobody will see it. But if you do it in this direction on the table saw, it will cut it at this angle. If you do it the wrong way, where the angle is pointing down when you cut, you'll way overcut because of the angle of the blade. Now to assemble the table legs, you take your notched piece that you already cut out, put an extra 2x4 there in the back to support it. You'll see why in a moment. Take a moment to check which side looks better, because this side that we're screwing into will be the inside, so that won't be as well seen. So if you have any knots or stamps or anything on the wood that would look kind of funny, do that on the inside, and then we will fit it together like this. After just seeing if everything lines up, I take some GRKs. I use 2.5 inch so that it doesn't sink all the way through when I'm doing when I'm joining two 2x4s together like that. But if you screw it in at a slight angle, it shouldn't be an issue. I'm going to put one screw in on each of these legs after lining it up flush. Measure here and make sure that it's the same length on each of these, where in the middle where they cross. I usually end up at 12 5/8 with these measurements. If you end up with a slightly different number, that's alright, as long as they're the same on both sides. Now that we're symmetrical, I put 3 screws in here to hold it together and ensure that it's strong. And always double check to make sure that your screws didn't poke through. 2.5 inch screws should be fine, but if you have 3 inch screws, sometimes they'll poke through. Now I'll put a couple more screws in the tops. I always like to put all my screws in on the same side, which is the notched side of the brace. That makes a nice clean surface on the outside with no screws visible. So the table legs are assembled, now onto the bench legs. Alright, here is our bench leg. To start off with this, I use the scrap left over from my table legs to conserve wood as much as possible. First I cut the 28-degree angle. Then I measure from the long point 15.5 inches. I'll include plans at the bottom of this video with all of the measurements and angles to make it a lot easier. And then I cut that at the same angle. And here are the legs. If I'm making a lot of picnic tables at once, sometimes it's easier to set up a jig. I lock my chop saw blade down like this, place the one that I've finished, and then screw down another piece of scrap behind it, preferably with the same angle, so then that ensures that each time I get the same exact cut. So now we have a big pile of legs. I cut some extra because I'll be making a couple picnic tables today. But for an 8-foot table, you'll need 12 of these. So 6 legs for each bench. Now we're going to make the bracket to attach the legs to the bench seat. We're going to keep the same angle, 28 degrees. Same deal if you don't have a chop saw. Just use your speed square, or you can just your leg piece and trace the angle onto it if that's easier. We're not going to need to do the notch for these. We're just going to screw it right in through here. So here I just cut the first angle, 28 degrees, measure off the long point, mark out 11 inches. But that will be an angle going in the opposite direction. So if you do it from the bottom, that way you spin it around. And here's your piece. This can also be attained by changing the bevel on your skill saw to 28 degrees, and then just cutting that bevel. This is a project that really doesn't need a lot of fancy tools. I'm going to show the most efficient way that I do it with the tools that I have, but I'll also show other options if you don't have as many tools. So now it's time to assemble the legs. Just line up your legs and the top piece like so that both edges are flush. I usually like to screw the two leg pieces together first to keep them together. Otherwise they're all moving around once I start to screw them into the top piece. Now, since this is my inside, I can toenail some screws in like this. Technically, toenailing is stronger than just screwing in the ends, because then that goes in the end of the grain and it doesn't grip on as well. When you toenail by doing the screw in at an angle like this, that grips right on across the grain. I threw together this little jig with some scrap wood so that I can line this up a lot easier. I just cut this with the same angle then threw some scrap wood here. That way I can butt this right into there, nice and flush, and everything is lined up where I want it. So we have the bench legs and the table legs, and then an extra piece for the middle, which is the same length as the table legs. It's just 27 inches long. And now it's time to put it together. There's one more piece, there's some braces, but we're going to cut that custom in after we put the table together to just ensure that it all fits properly. Now it's time to put it all together. I'm just using a table that I built last year as my workspace, but you probably have a better setup with workbenches and sawhorses. I have a pretty small shop, so this is what I'm using. So we're going to take our 2x6s. We'll need 9 PT 2x6s for this. Then place them face down. So whatever side is better, free of knots, trying to avoid lots of weird stamps and stuff. You put that face down. You also want to make sure that there's a nice clean face without knots. Now that I have my 5 2x6s laid out, I then take the center one, mark 12 inches from each side. And I also mark 4 feet in the middle. So this is an 8-foot table. If you were doing a 6-foot table, then obviously you'd mark 3 feet. Alright, now I take my legs and attach it with this side out. Since this is the clean side without any screws, this side will go out. I mark, this is 27 inches, so I would mark it at 13.5 for my center point. 2x6s, I mark it at 2 13/16, since they're not quite 6 inches wide. 2 13/16 is usually half. But depending on where you get your lumber, also pressure treated, due to it being so wet, often changes size. So I'd recommend you just find the middle on your own, because they're not always the same. So I have my 12 inches in and center point. Line up my center point on here. So using my speed square, make sure everything's square. I start screwing this in. Be really careful with this that you don't over-sink your screws so that they go all the way through. It's not very fun when you're eating dinner and you have screws sticking out. Then I also use my square as a spacer. So I set it there, slide up my other board up to it. Another thing you have to keep in mind is to make sure that it's pulled all the way up so that you don't have any boards that are curved or cupped and not fully attaching. Alright, then I screw it in the center of this other one. Now I'm going to put a piece in the middle so that everything's lined up. So in making these diagonal braces, it's kind of hard to explain just in a video exact measurement. So that is all in the plans below the video. Check that out and that will give you all the details you need to know. So now that we have our angle cut, so don't center it. Do it on one side of your center. Don't just put the 2x4 right in the center. Then on this side, I don't necessarily measure it out exactly. I just kind of line it up with the center of where the two legs cross, and then screw it all together. There, that's a pretty strong brace. So now we have the second brace marked out. Square. Make sure this is nice and square. If you don't have a 2-foot carpenter's square, you can do it with a speed square, and just do it right there, and that will give you enough of an idea. You could also use longer screws here if you'd like, as long as they don't poke through the other side. I just do 3, 1 on each side, and that should do it. So right here, I'm making a jig so that I can cut the edges with a curve. You don't have to do that. You could just use a square, like a large T-square or something, and just cut your edges straight. I like to mix it up a little bit and cut it at a curve. So I just took this piece of scrap wood, as long as my table, 8 feet. I'm going to cut a little notch. That's a little notch that I can put my pencil in. So I screwed that in the center of one end of my table. Then I take my pencil, put it in the notch, and then gives me a little template to mark with. So you can usually cut a slight curve with a circular saw, as long as you're not going too fast or the wood is super wet like mine is right now. So I like to round over the edges with a router. If you don't have a router, that's fine. You can just use your sander. If you don't have a sander, that's fine. You can just use sandpaper. It'll take a little longer. But I'm going to use the router. If you have one, a round over bit will make the end look nice and round it over. Now I'm going to hit the ends with the sander. It's also a good time if there are any stamps or any sort of imperfections on the top. It's always a good idea to sand it down. So with the benches, it's the same sort of idea. You want to put your best face of the 2x6 down so that when you flip it over, that will be the good side. Since my table legs were 12 inches from the end, I'm going to do these 11.5, but I'm going to place the legs on the outside of the mark, so, or inside from that direction. So that way, when I put my square here, I'm going to put the square on the right side, put my legs right here, and make sure it's all lined up, make sure I've got a nice even space here with the square, and then put it all together. On this side, 11.5. And I put legs on that side. Here, 46 and 3/4. That puts me at the middle. Don't forget to make sure that the clean side without screws is on the outside. Now, you put these brackets. I forgot to show you when I was cutting them. They are just 10 inches long with 2 45s like this. So these are the braces for the bench legs, and those are 10 inches long at a 45-degree angle. I do one on either side for the middle one. You could measure this beforehand, or you could just kind of center it out on the line. So, bench number 1 is done. Now, we'll cut the rounded edges. Since this is only 2 2x6s wide, it won't really need as wide of an angle. So, I'm going to measure half on here, so 48 inches, just a small mark so you don't really see it. Then take my piece of scrap wood, screw it in right at that mark. So put your screw in right in the middle, right in the crack between the 2 boards, so that it sinks into the bottom. With this, we do the same thing as on the end. Make a little notch, then put your pencil there, use it as a little stencil. Now you've got a nice curve. Alright. Well, that's it. A DIY removable bench picnic table. You can throw these benches around your campfire or move them around however you need. Plans are below in the description, as well as links to all of the tools I use. This is pretty simple to use with your basic tools, with an impact driver and a skill saw, and then some hand tools like square and tape measure, things like that. But if you want to make it a little bit faster, if you have chop saws and table saws, it will make it a little bit faster.
Alright, thanks for checking out this video. And thanks to Angelo for being in the video. Thank you.
Thank you for coming over.
And just a reminder, like you said before, the plans are in the description below, as well as links to all the tools that were used for this project. Thanks always for watching. Make sure to like the video if you didn't already. And I'll see you in the next video. See you later.